And welcome back to Nutrition Science Bites. I've invited one of our former guests back today, Dr. Shelley Wilkinson, and you'll find out why in a minute. But Shelley is the principal dietitian and director of Lifestyle Maternity, which is actually a private practice that specializes in nutrition support for women trying to become pregnant, who are pregnant. And in her academic role, she's also a project officer at the Mater Mothers Hospital in Brisbane. So, welcome back, Shelley.
Thanks for having me, Claire. It's good to be back.
And Shelley, you have that perfect mix of the research as well as the clinical practice because you're doing maternal health research and you're also seeing women on a day-to-day basis. So that's why I wanted to invite you back, because the question we're going to talk today is about nutrition and fertility. And this has come from a listener. So I think, if somebody's really worrying about, well, does food relate to nutrition and trying to become pregnant, I'm sure a lot of other couples are wondering about this. But first up, I thought we should actually check in, like, what how do you define fertility versus infertility?
That's a really good question. So fertility, if we look at the, mechanics of everything, fertility is when a woman can produce an egg, a man can produce a sperm, they can come together to fertilize, implant in the uterine wall, and then develop and grow into a fetus and then into a baby to be delivered. So that is the process, that's fertility, whereas infertility is measured in time. So it's the inability for someone to conceive in a defined period of time. Generally, that's within 12 months of regular unprotected sex. But if someone is over the age of 35, it reduces to in 6 months. And that's when someone then might reach out for assisted fertility processes.
I guess that makes sense then, Shelley, why fertility perhaps, it is something, you hear young couples discussing. And I guess it's because, like I think my mum had her first baby when she was still 20. And in my generation, we were moving towards our late 20s. And now I know with my daughters, early 30s is just considered completely the average time for first baby. So is that sort of what you're seeing as well, this sort of shift in the timing of when families are getting started with
That's
having kids?
very true. Yes, there's that shift, and some maybe less supportive news reports say that women forgot to have kids, but I think there's a lot of things going on. We're studying for longer, we're working, we're traveling, there's more opportunities. We have the pill, which helps us have our lives without falling pregnant straight away. And then there's also, I guess, public health things. So when people have certain lifestyles or if they're living in a larger body, it can take longer to fall pregnant.
Right. So there's all of these issues. And, you've got to say, don't you, if somebody's, saying, oh, you forgot to have children. Yeah. Have you looked at house prices lately
Yes,
to see,
exactly. Yes.
that's something that's changed as well. Okay. So let's go
Mm.
straight to the heart of the matter then, because the question was, is there a relationship between like nutrition and food and fertility? And this was specifically in the context of women. But when we get to the end, I want to ask you about men as well. So for
Oh,
a
mm.
woman who's now going, right, we really want to have children. Is there anything specific that should be done to improve fertility?
There certainly is. And this is something that I get a bit frustrated about. I've attended a number of fertility conferences and the room is talking about environmental factors and everyone zooms in on endocrine disruptors. But I think the elephant in the room is lifestyle and nutrition and physical activity, which have large impacts. And we see that people's behaviours don't align with guidelines. So there isn't one specific food or one specific supplement, no matter how good there's certain spin in advertising. There's no one food that will make someone fall pregnant, but there's a pattern of eating. So we know a lot from the big nurses' health study that was run out of Harvard, is run out of Harvard from the late 70s. And there was a cohort of, I think, just under 20,000 people who were trying to fall pregnant and weren't having fertility problems. And they were able to it was an observational study, which we know isn't the highest level. We want to do a randomized control trial if we say this equals that. But what they did was they did a lot of modeling on mapping of how they ate, what they ate, and the exercise they did. And they
Yep.
came out with some very clear guidelines as to what made it more likely to fall pregnant. And they even did mathematical modelling, some very clever beings there, who were able to say there were certain fertility behaviours that if you did them, it decreases the risk of ovulatory fertility. So if you did just one of these behaviours, you had 30% less likely to have a chance of ovulatory fertility, and each behaviour went to 50, 63, 75, 84% drop in the risk of ovulatory fertility. So I've kept you hanging. I'll tell you what those
Yeah.
behaviours are.
Well, can I ask you a
So,
question before you tell us
yes,
those behaviors? Because that was a mouthful.
yes,
Ovulatory fertility.
fertility, yes.
So by that, do you mean, so the behaviors you're going to tell us are the ones that lowered that, so you are less likely to get pregnant if you did those behaviors? So
Or you
ovulatory
didn't. So,
fertility. Oh, right.
or
Okay.
maybe ovulatory infertility. So if you don't ovulate regularly, that's ovulatory infertility.
Right.
And that might be someone with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or there are other things, say a higher BMI or very high visceral fat. When we store our fat in our central around our organs, it disrupts our metabolic health. So doing these certain behaviours made it less likely to have that. It's sort of a double negative. Less likely to have the ovulatory fertility, more likely that you'll ovulate and ovulate
Great.
well.
Great.
Yes,
Okay. Now you can tell us.
yes,
So you're going to tell us the
yes.
behaviors that were
The
associated
behaviours.
with you
Mm,
more likely to have a good ovulation
a good
pattern.
ovulation, that's right.
Right, which is obviously the pre-runner to be able to fall pregnant. Okay,
Yes,
let's
yes,
jump in.
yes. So let's see. So the first one, and no, in no powerful order, because if you just choose one or more, they all dropped your negative risk. So having a diet that was contained low GI carbs, low glycemic index carbs, and whole grains. There was having more plant rather than animal proteins. There was going for 2 and 5, our favourite, 2 fruit and 5 veg a day. There was having healthy fats and dropping saturated and trans fats in the diet, limiting caffeine and alcohol, dropping body weight by about as little as 5% of body weight,
Mm.
having an appropriate supplement like folic acid, and then being physically active. So no surprises there, but they actually showed mathematically that the drop in risk was additive with each of those that was added and followed in someone's healthy habit
Yeah, so
behaviors.
Shelley, I think it's worth discussing because, like, all of those things that you just described, they roll off our tongue, and like as health professionals, you feel like you can say
Mm,
them in your sleep. But actually, I think if someone's really trying to prepare their body, they want to have a baby, then they are things that are worth checking in on, because I know that quite often, when we ask people, oh, how healthy do you eat? Most people will say, well, I think I usually eat healthy, and I certainly eat more healthy than, people I observe at work or whatever. But that's on a background. What most people don't realize is that the average Australian actually has a very unhealthy dietary pattern these days. So that seems to me like a really good place to start. Can you just say them again? It was um,
mm.
more
Yes.
plant
So
foods.
low GI, more plants and fewer animal proteins,
Yeah.
low GI carbs slash whole grain carbs, enough fruit and vegetables, so 2 fruit and 5 veg a day, folic acid supplement, healthy fats and reduced saturated and trans fats, so minimally processed, reducing ultra processed foods, limiting caffeine and alcohol, and being physically active as well as that. Generally, we don't want to lose weight by dieting, but by changing the way, the quality of our diet and how much we move will often result in a small weight loss. And no matter what weight someone was, a drop of 5% has a major effect on positive ovulation, being more likely to ovulate.
I think one of the challenges for
And
people is
also, sorry, oh
still,
yeah.
yeah, putting that into practice, really, that is
Oh,
actually really
yes.
hard. But then at the same time, my brain's going, wow, that's everything we try and do through no money, no time. And
Mm.
and the regular challenges that we run, like we've got one coming up soon called Take Two, and it's about just taking two goals and then working with our program over 6 weeks to put them into practice. So I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes. But I interrupted you. What were you about to say?
Oh, sorry, no, because you said yes, and people think they're eating well, but they're actually not. And there's no blame because we live in that sort of environment that pushes junk food as everyday foods. Um, and it makes it harder to move because there's labour-saving devices, all those sorts of things. But when I was working in the fertility clinic at the Mater Mothers Hospital, we actually surveyed 500 women who were attending the clinic. And what we did is we asked them what they ate with a lovely diet quality score, and we found that only 1 in 10 women were eating sufficient breads and cereals and grains, which meant they were missing out on those whole grains, and that missing out on the fibre that helps their guts be healthy and reduce inflammation, and missing out on folic acid and iodine, which comes there. They were only 1 in 10 were eating enough veg, so again dropping fibre, but not getting those antioxidants that are so important. And then they were eating a little bit more fruits and fruit group from the meat and alternatives and the dairy, but also a third of their food was coming from junk food. Third of the calories was coming from junk food. So sometimes when we say to people, this is what is advised to eat, they say that's a lot of food. But often if you are pushing more nutritious foods out with the junk food, it means you're not eating in a way that supports fertility. And in the background, what's happening is there's more inflammation and the hormones are disrupted. Not that we can ever balance, in inverted commas, hormones, but when you're eating in a way that needs your insulin to spike, to bring your blood glucose back down, to put it into the muscles to run your body, those spikes of insulin have a knock-on effect to the fertility hormones, disrupting the way that they're working as well.
Oh, right. Well, that's another reason to eat low glycemic index
Mm.
carbohydrates. Can we just talk about carbohydrates for a minute? Because I think people get a lot of messages about, no carbs or whatever, whereas the message really is no, like ultra processed or junk food type carbs that cause that insulin
That's
spike
right.
that you were mentioning about. But I don't think, because we've had folate and iodine added to bread now for what it must be 15 years. I
Mm,
th- I
mm.
think that the young generation of women don't realize that these were actually added partly because of a rise in a type of birth defect called neural tube defects attributed to low folate. So it was decided back then after a very long and careful monitoring period to actually add it in to improve birth outcomes. So, if you're thinking about becoming pregnant, do not give up your bread, but select the whole grain, lower glycemic index. And don't you think, Shelley, like I know when you go to the bread section, you go, oh, like 100 different products, just pick 1 week, you're going to pick the healthiest looking bread. It's likely to have more
Mm.
starch and fewer additives added into it, and it's probably going to say whole grain or low GI. But there's one other food group that I thought when that nurses health study that you said from Harvard University, like they're American women, I reckon they still would have found that like a little bit of a shock because in Australia we recommend even higher intakes of vegetables than they do. So I think that's one positive thing in Australia. Our baseline vegetables, at least we eat a little bit more than the Americans in that way.
That's right. And the other thing that was interesting, so the World Health Organization wants us to be having less than 1% of our energy from trans fats. Now, Americans get 3% of their energy from trans fats. We actually get about 0.5 or zero point 0.6. So we're actually consuming a lot less trans fats, which is positive. However, the food that these really come from are the baked goods and fried goods, so biscuits, cakes, pastries. And so taking out more of those processed foods will reduce trans fats because what they actually do, I did a bit of a deep dive into it. Well, what sits behind each of these claims? It sounds like it's something that a dietitian always says, eat more of this, eat more of these ones, more fruit and veg, more whole grains. But with the trans fats and the saturated fat, it actually works on a little receptor called the PPAR gamma, so the peroxisome proliferation activated receptor gamma. And what that does is that influences insulin sensitivity at that cellular level. So if eating these foods, it's actually making our insulin less effective. So we actually see what's happening at that metabolic level of why these foods, it sounds like just cut out these fat, blah, 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 as, we get sort of called the
Yeah.
food police about. We just
Yeah.
seem to be saying the same things, but there's actually a reason, the science that sits behind all of these claims
Yeah,
is really
and different
powerful.
reasons for different health outcomes. That's super interesting because
Mm,
most people would think, oh, saturated fat. oh, if I want to become pregnant, why do I have to be worrying about my heart? But it's actually helping
Mm,
your insulin sensitivity. And so that's really, really important. So you've already told us then, Shelley, if we summarize so far, that nutrition is important for fertility. We've talked about those diet and lifestyle components that, if implemented, the research from that large cohort study where there were 20,000 women who were hoping to become pregnant, that if they had those behaviors, they were more likely to be ovulating, have ovulatory fertility. And so then that then leads, like we've already talked about, and in that study, one of them was having adequate folate, wasn't it? Adequate folate intake.
mm,
And we've already said
mm,
that Australia, as a country, we weren't getting enough folate, so it got added to bread roughly around 15 years ago. But are there other supplements then that, because you go in any big chemist, there is a whole pregnancy section of supplements. So if someone is
mm,
trying to become pregnant, what is the current recommendation about like what they should take, or you know, can they have no supplement, or how will they know?
mm. And that's a good question, because as you go into any pharmacy or go into any social media feed, and it's there and it's being pushed, and it's a bit like with there's no superfoods, there's supermarketing, and I think similarly with supplements, it's the same message. It feels like there's more that we should take, but the only specific supplement that's been shown to influence pregnancy outcomes is that folic acid, and that's
Right.
400 micrograms for most people in the month before to the first 3 months of pregnancy. But I'd even say 3 months before, because that's how long it takes an egg to develop. Um, I often say to women, start as you wish to continue, and folic acid comes with iodine in one or two supplements. Iodine is essential in pregnancy. As we've talked about, it's in our food supply, but we need to top up with 150 micrograms each day in pregnancy. So a folic acid iodine supplement is something I suggest rather than a multivitamin, which ends up being expensive because that just
Yeah.
means all of the things in that multivitamin are water soluble. If we don't need it, we wee it out. And generally, none of the other things in there are essential. Now, there's a couple of maybes for supplements. So, iron deficiency anemia is the most prevalent deficiency in the world. 1 in 3 childbearing women have this problem. So, recommending that women get their iron tested and take a supplement, but it needs to be a specific iron supplement to
Right.
address an anemia, not a multivitamin. Vitamin D is the other one that's a maybe, depending on what someone's blood test is like. There's a lot of interest around zinc and selenium for both men and women. There's more research in men, but the people so I've gone and had a look in the Fertility Society of Australia and New Zealand. They've got a special interest group and have produced some position papers. And they say in the zinc and selenium one, the studies just haven't been done well enough to tell us the
Yeah.
answer. But they
Right.
say as long as we're taking zinc and selenium under the recommended amount, it's potentially safe. It may not be effective, but it's not damaging for men, and there's really no data for women. But omega-3 is another one we hear a lot about. It's a long-chain fatty acid, essential for brain and eye development, and reduces inflammation. Now, we can get it from our diet or a supplement. And we know that the Heart Foundation position papers, when we talk about heart health, they've actually come out and said there's only for dropping our triglycerides, one of our blood fats, is a supplement effective. The rest, it's only effective if you get omega-3 from food. Now, there's a few different studies around omega-3. There was a time to conceive cohort study done. And now cohort studies aren't the top of the evidence pyramid. It just says when this happened at the same time rather than this caused this. And 200
Shelley,
women who were naturally trying to yep,
I was just going to say
too
before we,
detailed.
yeah, no, before we go on and talk about the cohort study, I was just
Oh,
going to tell you the way I always think of cohort studies is that, like that,
yes.
a cohort study, it's like you've got the movie camera running, and
Mm,
you're observing those women, then those 200 women over time, following around. Oh, look, they did this. Oh, look, they ate that.
mm,
As opposed to experimenting on them and go, I'm going to make you eat these foods, and this group is not going to get those, and we'll see who gets pregnant first. So, and that
mm,
that would be pretty mean type of study, and likely unethical. So, um, the reason why cohort studies are common in nutrition is because we cannot experiment on people for their whole life or force feed them or deprive them for their whole life. So these cohort studies you're talking about are really important. And what did you call this cohort study you were just talking
This
about?
was called the time to conceive cohort. So they had a number of women, and there were little groups within that. So they had some who tried to fall pregnant naturally. They had some doing IVF, and they were giving them different supplements to test. But again, as you say, just watching rather than experimenting, which isn't the done thing.
Yeah,
Um, so with 200 women who were just trying to conceive naturally, they said giving omega-3 supplementation, there was no strong association between taking omega-3 and the possibility of
right.
conceiving. But when they looked at 900 women who are undergoing IVF, there was a slight association between taking omega-3 and conceiving. But also, when you dig into this literature, sometimes just conceiving, there's something called a biochemical or a chemical pregnancy, which is just falling pregnant, staying pregnant for a couple of weeks, but miscarrying. And so in some studies,
Yeah.
that's counted as a pregnancy, which is a false hope that I think you can't. Some look at live births, some look at miscarriage rates, some look at this conception or biochemical chemical pregnancy. So you've got to be comparing apples and apples in this space. And sometimes
Yeah.
I see a lot on social media, a lot of promotion about, especially omega-3. There have been studies come out, people coming out making these claims about how wonderful it is for conception. But when you dig in, sometimes, as you say, with the way they're running studies, they might be giving diet or they might be giving omega-3 supplements, but they never measure whether people consumed them. And sometimes they throw everyone in together, someone who's just trying to fall pregnant naturally, sometimes someone with PCOS, and
Or
sometimes they don't
someone
report.
or someone on IVF all in the same group and they're not
Yes,
separating them out.
yes.
So Shelley, I think
Mm,
what you're convincing us is that it's super important, but there's also a lot of confounding or complicating factors. So it
mm,
kind of suggests to
mm.
me, and you say if you agree with this or not, but I think if this is um, a couple who are trying to conceive and it's not going according to plan, then a nutrition review by an accredited practicing dietitian who specializes in fertility sounds like a really good investment to me.
Mm,
And
mm.
then I'm also just going to make a plug, and I will put this in the show notes, is we do have a nutrition assessment tool. It does have a price, but that's the Australian Eating Survey. So people could do an assessment of their diet and take that along to their dietitian as a starting place.
That would be
So
great. And I think also that means that when you're then working with a dietitian, you're working with your own information and you can spend the whole session looking at plans rather than spending a lot of it gathering data that you've already gathered.
yeah. So now what I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you next is because, we will have some listeners who are undergoing IVF. So am I correct
Mm,
in thinking that everything we've talked about, those earlier factors, which we can make into a summary list and put as a fact
mm.
sheet on No Money, No Time, all of those factors will still apply. But are there any other special considerations in regard to, women undergoing IVF?
I think, as you said, the first thing, this all applies, but it's almost pushed even harder because people are really wanting to make the most of their egg quality and keep their health really healthy, for want of a better word, to enhance
Optimize
the
it.
chance of
Yeah.
optimize. Yeah, so essentially, you're optimizing your health for successful egg development, pickup, implantation. So the one of the things I know, hands up, I did IVF, and I was really pushed something called coenzyme Q10, which is called ubiquinol. It's a powerful antioxidant, and it helps with energy production. Now, many fertility blogs also promote this coenzyme Q10. And I know in the past on some of your other podcasts, you've explained what free radicals are. They're like those when you're practicing tennis and you've got that
Yeah. Yeah.
machine throwing
Firing
the
at
balls
you.
at you. Yes. And then so an antioxidant is something like
It
like the
catches mitt.
car, it
It's like
catches mitt or,
yeah, an
the
airbag.
balloon that, yeah, an airbag. That's what I'm trying to think, word finding difficulties. So the antioxidant gathers all of that and prevents the damage of those tennis balls, of those free radicals in the body. Now, there has also been a number of studies around this coenzyme Q10 showing that, and these were meta-analyses, so the studies that pull a lot of really good studies together to give even more power. And there's low to very low quality evidence showing that these actually influence um, fertility and in subfertile women. However, if we're going to step back, we've got some powerful antioxidants called fruit and vegetable that come in fruit and vegetables, and we know that people aren't eating enough of these. And actually, if they were consuming sufficient fruit and vegetables, that would have a major impact on inflammation and on fertility.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, I was actually gonna summarize almost the same. So rather than
Mm,
people maybe feeling guilty about, "Oh, no, I don't wanna buy, that particular supplement and take it," when the evidence is, low quality, that
mm,
promoting your plant-based antioxidant nutrient intake from a whole diverse type of plants. And I always find it interesting that whole grains in particular are so overlooked, because whole grains actually have vitamin E, which is a really powerful antioxidant nutrient.
that's right.
And from
Mm,
those magic lifestyle things you told us at the start, um, more whole grains, more vegetables and fruit, plant-based proteins, that's actually where all nature's antioxidant
mm,
nutrients are hiding. So I think,
mm,
we can certainly tell people which foods are rich in those nutrients, but reassure them that the best way to optimize their dietary antioxidant intake is really by including a broad range of plant-based foods. So now
mm,
the last thing I want to ask you about, and I imagine it's probably neglected, is fertility in men. Now, you did tell us again earlier about zinc and selenium, and we can list the food
mm.
sources of those, that they're important for men. But are there any other more broad nutrition principles that apply to men to ensure that they're producing, really, really healthy sperm?
I think it's just it aligns with the food principles for women to improve their fertility because we know, and maybe broader looking at lifestyle factors. So we know the lifestyle factors that impact sperm health are smoking, taking recreational drugs, alcohol, not being sufficiently active, as well as a poor quality diet and obesity. So there's again that metabolic health, negative metabolic health cascade. If we think of what's happening in the background with insulin impacting men's fertility hormones um, by taking those steps to even try one or two of the things in the list that we talked about will have a major impact on positively on men's fertility.
Yeah, it sounds to me, Shelley, that, like it's like a project really, isn't it? And if people have had
Mm,
busy lives and now this is the life stage where they want to start a family, that almost like treating it as a project and checking off on all of those factors. Because one thing
mm,
that I think that has changed, certainly from like my mum's day, and when they were having their children so just so early, really, is that there is a lot more access to things like coffee and even alcohol, like even
mm.
the amount of wine and beer available and that the average Australian consumes, that was way lower than what it is, particularly for women. So it sounds to me like almost like like you might spring clean your house, but like spring cleaning your nutrition and lifestyle is a really wise thing to do.
I think that's so true. And um, I know we've done some work together on how people eat and how partners impact what their other partner eats in pregnancy. And that plays forward to fertility as well. We know that if men were eating more healthily, their partners were more likely to have diets that aligned with the dietary guidelines. And I think it works both ways. So someone's not sitting
Yeah.
on the couch eating chocolate while the other person's turning their head and they're finally giving in. Um, yeah, I think it's working together to try and support each other, because it
Oh,
takes two to
yeah.
tango.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? Like
Mm,
who
mm.
who wants to have two separate meals happening in the house either, for that
Ah,
matter?
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
So, in closing, then, is there anything else that we've missed, or any other myths or things that that you really wish that everyone trying to conceive or trying to improve their fertility knew it when it came to food nutrition and fertility?
It seems so basic, but just that there are no special foods and it's that pattern of eating. And don't try not to be, or don't feel guilty if you're swayed by advertising, but try and stay strong. There's another one around there. MTHFR, the methylene hydrofolate reduction. That's why they
It's a
make it an
mouthful.
acronym, reductase. It's a way we metabolize that folic acid that's important to have. And there's a lot that's saying we need to get tested because that gene that processes folic acid is very variable. There's a lot of different people have different genes, and some people are saying that this can mean you need a special supplement to take. But some researchers from Western Australia have done this work and said it's very common to be variable, but that doesn't necessarily affect its function. So 60 to 70% of people have a variation in this gene, but the frequency of neural tube defects is about 1 in 1,000 in Australia. So the changes alone aren't impacting neural tube defects. It's more important for us to find the women who have a low folic acid diet and aren't taking folic acid and support them in taking folic acid and eating well than doing testing to find out who's got this gene and then getting compounded
Yeah.
special supplements. So sometimes there's a lot of chat around this on social media, and it's not required. So I just hope people
Mm.
don't feel guilty that they're being sucked in to all of these different supplements that they are being promoted, but going back to first principles of having that minimally processed diet where possible, and really nourishing and optimizing their fertility through the basic pattern of eating.
And what that says to me, Shelley, is that it really encourages people to really push the healthy diet and do not drop the bread, because that's where, like,
Mm,
the extra folate has been added into our food supply, but commonly avoided. But read the label so that you select the one that's optimal for you. And the other thing that folate is in, basically, it's in a whole range of fresh foods. Um, I
mm.
don't know if I've told you the story once, but I never forgotten about how important folate was, because when I was a brand new graduate, I remember I was referred a woman for a dietary assessment of her folate intake because she had had a baby born with no brain, actually, like it's called
Oh,
anencephaly,
mm,
due to extremely low folate, and they were trying to work out whether it was one of these genetic defects. And I still remember it struck me
mm.
because she only ate, 2 foods, well, 3 foods if you 3. She only ate hot chips, sauce, and Coca-Cola. And I
Oh,
still remember, like, feeling so sad for her that there was no one in her life who could actually support her to have a more varied diet. And, so I think
varied. Mm,
the other group of people who I would encourage to go and get nutrition support early is if for any reason you're already on a restricted diet. And that may be because of food allergies,
mm,
a bowel condition or a medical condition or another genetic condition, but you need help even more. So please, please talk to your GP about referring you to a dietitian with specialized skills in fertility and in pregnancy.
mm.
And Dietitians Australia website, find a dietitian, and you can actually put in the keywords and your postcode, and they'll tell you who has a practice in your area. So, Dr. Shelley Wilkinson, thank you very much for joining us again today and for answering the questions from one of our listeners for Nutrition Science Bites on nutrition and fertility.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for raising this important issue.
Okay, lovely.